Welcome, everyone. My name is Kitty Douglas, and I am president of BigTentUSA. At BigTent, we are steadfast in our commitment to defending our democratic values, the Constitution, and the rule of law. Our goal is to empower you with facts and calls to action so you can become a stronger, more effective advocate for our country. And we need every one of us on this call to do that. Our friends at Five Calls have made it very easy for you to use your voice to object any further taxpayer dollars footing the bill for Donald Trump's ballroom. So pick up your phones and call your congressional delegation. The link will be in the chat. And now to our amazing speakers. Amanda López Askin is a public servant rooted in New Mexico, raised in La Cruces by a hardworking single mother who relied on assistance and public housing. Amanda became a therapist before running for the Doña County Clerk in 2018. In that role, she leads with fairness and compassion, ensuring election integrity while combating misinformation and protecting election workers. Now running for Secretary of State of New Mexico, Amanda is focused on keeping elections safe and secure, expanding voter access and education, increasing campaign finance transparency, and supporting small businesses by streamlining licensing processes across the state. Jocelyn Benson is Michigan's 43rd Secretary of State and a Democratic candidate for governor. Since 2019, she has transformed Michigan's motor vehicle services while strengthening election security and access. Benson is running for governor to expand efficient, accessible public services, lower costs for working families, and invest in education, housing, childcare, healthcare, and economic development for all. And last but not least, our amazing moderator and friend of BigTent, Joanna Lydgate. She is co-founder and Chief Executive Officer at States United Democracy Center and States United Action, nonpartisan organizations dedicated to preserving the rule of law and free, fair, secure elections. Since 2020, States United has provided legal, research, policy, and communication support to state officials around the country. Before launching States United, Joanna served as Chief Deputy Attorney General of Massachusetts. And with that, I will turn the call over to Joanna. I want to thank our three speakers for the amazing work they do and for coming to BigTent tonight.
Thanks so much, Kitty. Thank you all for being here. It's really cool to see all the locations in the chat, and I'm especially grateful to Secretary Benson and Amanda for joining us tonight. It's great to be with you both. We are 6 months out from Election Day. Primaries are already underway. The president is issuing executive orders. The Supreme Court is issuing decisions. The DOJ is demanding voter rolls. There's a lot going on, so let's jump right in. And I'd like to start just with the theme of tonight's conversation, which is about states and the role states play in elections. We think about elections as national events, but they're, of course, run at the state and local level. Secretary Benson, if we can start with you, can you just talk a little bit about the role that states play in our election system, and in particular, the importance of secretaries of state?
Hey guys, I'm in transit right now, as you guys know, but I'm happy to kick it off. And thank you all for having me here tonight, especially in a moment where the Voting Rights Act has been eviscerated just this last week. We know it's never been more important for state officials, like secretaries of state, to be ready to stand guard over our states. I saw that first as Secretary of State during the tumultuous 2020 election, where Donald Trump lied about our processes, where he tried to interfere with the certification of our election. But even so, we were able to successfully block his effort to overturn that election, even though it meant for so many of us standing up to very real threats of violence as well. But I think for many of us state leaders who have gone through the fire in 2020, we'll proudly stand up to anyone, anytime, anywhere who would get in the middle of our rights, our freedoms, our citizens, and their democracy. And that is unfortunately what it's meant to be a state leader in these times. But because we have groups like States United and so many incredible state leaders around the nation, particularly in battleground states like ours. The women of Michigan and so many others have been able to lock arms, find that courage to stand together, stand up to tyranny, and ensure that the law is followed, the truth is told, and the will of the voters rules the day.
Thank you so much. And Amanda, you've been serving as a county clerk since 2018. We know from so much research that we've done at States United that voters have a lot of trust in their local election officials, and with good reason. Can you talk a little bit about the key responsibilities of a local election official and kind of what that's looked like for you over the last few years?
Sure. And I just also wanted to thank Secretary Benson for being on. I don't know if she remembers, but several years, I've met her a couple of times, specifically in DC. Our Secretary of State introduced me, but also her first name is my middle name. So there's these connects that I have in my own head. So to have her on today is really an honor, and I'm so appreciative. But connected to local responsibility, the perception from the public, I started in 2018 as an appointee. The clerk prior to me had resigned. I was an adjunct professor doing some mental health. So I just thought democracy was amazing, and I was going to join the fight, and was not, frankly, prepared for what happened. In 2018, we had one of the most watched congressional races in the country. It was one of the top three. And there was a delay in the absentee voting because it was unprecedented. We had literally like 5 times the amount. And I was 5 days in as an election official, as an appointee. So I always joke, there's nothing like being on Fox News on the Saturday night after elections. And we began 2 months of litigation. And so that was my opening. And one of the things I said frequently to the county clerks across the state, there's 33 counties. So there's 33 of us, is first they came for Doña County. And that was true because of that specific election and the narrative that began then. I really got an absolute taste of what it meant to be an election official and what it would take moving forward. And the first thing I needed to do was really understand our elections. And what I found was absolutely a relief, because we have one of the best, election systems in the country. We have been ranked, repeatedly. We're not on a lot of top 10 lists, but one of the ones we are is, of course, the MIT ranking. And we have instituted all of the best practices connected to elections. And that is something every New Mexican should be proud of and that we should talk about continually. And all of the checks and balances we have, all of the layers of access that we have that is also balanced with security. So I was born and raised in southern New Mexico, in Las Cruces, New Mexico. I'm a local girl, so to speak. And for me, and I've served in other capacities. I've done a lot of animal advocacy. I served on the Board of Regents. Like I said, I'm a local girl. So I think there was some level of inherent trust in me because I was familiar-ish, or you knew somebody that went to high school with me, it was kind of one of those things. So it was great, but I thought, I'll just show people the process and they will be like, yes, this is so good. What I didn't understand was that it didn't matter what I showed. It didn't matter the evidence. It didn't matter the layers that I showed in the best practices, that there was a set inness, or there was a determination to keep this mindset. Because, this is my perspective. I really believe that there was a fundamental shift in how power was going to change in our country, and the power structure that had always been was being threatened. And they didn't matter what I said, it was being threatened. Therefore, there must be something wrong with the system that is shifting it. And I just wasn't prepared. I was very idealistic. And I think some of the things that Secretary Benson had gone through at the time was very sympathetic. I have a child, and I remember watching some of the events and dealing with my own local things that were very difficult, and just, tested my faith in a lot of ways in humanity. I watched her on such a macro scale. And I remember literally tearing up and calling our Secretary of State, and we talked about it. And I remember saying something along the lines of, because I know they're colleagues and friends, saying like, send her my collective love as a mom to a mom, just because I felt it. And how many years later, 8 years later, from 2018 to now, unfortunately, I still feel it. So what I have made a habit of doing is dispelling any kind of misinformation, malinformation at any given time, including public comment in many of the meetings that I'm involved with. I'm very matter of fact about it. I don't believe in attacking or, being defensive, and that has been helpful.
Yeah, for those who don't know, one of the things Amanda's referring to is during that 2020 election chaos, Secretary Benson at one point had armed protesters on her front lawn at night. But that is emblematic of so much of what our election officials have faced across the country, and indeed our state officials more broadly, as a result of the lies about 2020 that have, of course, only continued since then. And now with election deniers in the federal administration, the threat landscape is really supercharged. So let's turn to that for a moment. As we look ahead to the midterms in November, which are going to be very consequential, what are the biggest challenges that, from each of your perspectives, election officials are facing, and how are they preparing? How are they responding? Secretary Benson, if it's okay, it would be great to start with you.
Sure. Hi,
If
sorry.
you can actually touch specifically on Calais, the recent Supreme Court decision, given your expertise in that area, that would be great.
Yeah, well, I think the decision that the Supreme Court recently issued that makes it nearly impossible to bring a voting rights claim under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is a abomination, and strikes at the heart of what democracy is supposed to be about, which is this promise that the power of the people must always be greater than the people in power. And the federal law, one of the greatest federal laws in the history of our nation, that was designed to draw a bright line to prevent against centuries-old efforts to disenfranchise and silence people who had the power and who in a democracy always have the power. A law meant to protect that power was foundational and is foundational to everything else that we fight for, whether it's lower costs, better healthcare, better schools, an economy that works for all. It all starts and ends with access to the ballot box. My parents, who are special education teachers, taught me that. So it's particularly devastating for so many of us that these federal protections that were once unassailable and always the backdrop for protecting our democracy, that they're now gone. And it underscores all the more important reasons why we need state officials, attorneys general, secretaries of state, and governors who will do what the Voting Rights Act is supposed to do, which is protect marginalized communities and really every community and their right to vote. I'll mention New Mexico is ranked #1 by the MIT. Under my leadership, Michigan's elections have been ranked from ranked 31 in the nation under that index to #2. And I always say New Mexico's #1. And the only reason why New Mexico has ranked higher above Michigan is because they have a state Voting Rights Act that is meant to supplement and protect the voices of voters in that state. I want, as governor, for one of the first pieces of legislation I signed to be Michigan's State Voting Rights Act, which we have written and are ready to introduce next week, and ensure we're working to pass it here as well, because that is what we need to do as state officials in this moment: support each other, learn from each other, and take these best practices that we are having to piecemeal implement to protect our democracy as administrators and as policymakers, and create that quilt of protection in every one of our states in the absence of protection that should be there from the federal government. The last thing I'll say on that is how in 2020, when we all did lock arms and successfully defeated an unprecedented nationally coordinated effort to try to overturn the results of a legitimate presidential election, the reason we were able to do that was because of great organizations like States United that actually convened us and brought us together, but also with our common vision and recognition that of strength in numbers. If each of the 7 battleground states, for example, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, sometimes New Mexico, but always Arizona and also Nevada. If we worked a lot. I'm just kidding. New Mexico and Arizona and Nevada, along with the 3 Midwestern states. If we lock arms and alongside with Georgia and support each other, work with each other, we have greater strength than even the federal government. And that is exactly why a coordinated effort defeated that work. So now here we are in 2026, 6 years later, with that fabric still in place. with new state leaders who have come since then to join that work, and leaders who will be on the ballot, I hope this fall, to join us in continuing that work, because make no mistake about it, the path to the presidency in 2028 runs right through those states I mentioned. And if you do not have state leaders in those states who are ready and willing and determined, not just to not bend the knee, but also to protect and defend our voting systems and our democracy, then I do worry about the future of our elections, not just in 28, but beyond. So electing state leaders in 26, who will be there in 28 to protect and defend and ensure no one interferes with our democracy, who says no when Donald Trump tries to send troops into our states and says, no, you can't do that under the law, I'll see you in court. Lawmakers and leaders with the backbone to do that is what's going to save our democracy again.
And these will be the people to oversee the 2028 presidential, of course, as well. Let me just ask a quick follow-up about threats for this year. We have, of course, a president who's already proven himself willing to try to overturn an election. We have an incredibly consequential set of races, both federal and statewide, coming up in November. We're already watching the weaponization of the Department of Justice and really the whole apparatus of the federal government against the states and their election infrastructure. Can you talk a little bit about what you view as the top threats this year, and why ultimately we should feel confidence in states' ability to push back against those?
I think the top threats this year are efforts to, one, interfere with our elections. So, for example, demand the private data of voters to try to remove eligible citizens from the rolls under the guise of fighting voter fraud, but really just an effort to create chaos and confusion on election day and the midterms. An effort just recently, Wayne County was asked to turn over their ballots from 2024, which is really just an effort to set the table to potentially seize ballots in 2026. All of the through line for overcoming these challenges is state and local officials who will stand guard and say no and follow the law and recognize that our responsibility and duty is to make sure everyone can vote, not to bend the knee to the president of the United States, and to ensure in this election and every other, it's the citizens who decide who wins, not a candidate, not anyone else, not the president. In doing that, it requires us, as we've done now for a number of cycles, to engage in scenario planning with local officials, where we just today, my chief of staff was in Grand Rapids working with local officials there to make sure we're running through scenarios, not just with local clerks, but with law enforcement and first responders, so that on election day or in the lead up to during the early voting period, if anything happens, we have a rapid response practice already in place and can just go to mitigate, de-escalate, and block any attempts to interfere with the elections. This doesn't mean we're not in a battle, a very real battle over our democracy and our elections. We are prepared for that battle. We are working together to protect our systems during that battle, but we also still are in a battle. And it's one that I think all of us have a responsibility to see and to recognize and to talk about, because ultimately, at the end of the day, if there are more pro-democracy citizens than those who are willing to just see it wither on the vine, that's ultimately the secret weapon that we have to win this battle. Engaged citizens who will demand that all of their leaders and federal officials stand to protect their voice and their vote, come what may. If we can do that together, we can prevail. And 26 is going to be a test of all of our willingness and fortitude and ability to do that.
You've certainly done it before, can do it again. Amanda, what about at the local level? What are you seeing? How are you preparing? How are you thinking about the next few months?
So in the local level, part of the challenge is we still have to get the work done. So these bigger picture threats, these ideas, these concerns we have to acknowledge them, address them directly. But at this end of the day, I am still a county clerk in our borderlands. And I am beholden to my community to run a great election. So that'll always be like the first line. But I have a great team that helps me do that. So having said that, part of, I think, the challenge is acknowledging the fears of our community and concerned folks and validating them. Now, I have a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, so my background's in mental health. Okay, and the joke is always like that's been the most helpful, skill that I've learned that could help me in this position. And it's not true. But what I will say is validating people's concern, but also at the same time saying we're concerned too. Beyond the overreach, I've heard some things like, are we even going to have elections? There's this kind of bigger, like it's constant. And as somebody who is inherently hopeful, also giving that message to our electorate in general, because we're hearing such doom and gloom. It's like this cloud coming over. These are being stripped. And so it becomes so discouraging that sometimes there's even a hesitation to participate, because it's like, what's the point? It's this really, so I think continuing to engage in a positive way, and how much we need everybody to get on board. And I've said this on the campaign trail. I've said this in closed company and open company. We are in a street fight for our democracy. It is no holds barred at this point. We are on that level to where we have to do everything we can, pull out every tool we have in our tool belt. And because I believe the average person and the average citizen did not sign up for what's going on in this country. You talk about BigTent having these, we really need to respect other ideas, perspective, and world's view. Absolutely. That's something that I think is really key to bringing us together. But at the end of the day, we have to remain hopeful, but also cautious and vigilant. Locally, I really believe, because our elections have been ranked so high, I really feel locally there is a lot of faith in our elections here in southern New Mexico, even though I'm from a border community. And so when you think about, we are next to Mexico and Texas, and we have had so much ICE kind of narratives going on, and you all across the country know that. I think we have to acknowledge those fears as well. And we have to, at the same time, remain vigilant, but also hopeful, because that's what people need to hear to encourage them to participate and to hopefully shift things fundamentally. I also have said, I really believe these midterms are going to fundamentally change our country in a way that may last for decades, if not hundreds of years. And so we're hyper aware, hyper vigilant, but also for me, hyper hopeful, because I don't believe the average citizen has signed up for what's going on in our country. And I'm counting on them, frankly.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I know we're going to lose Secretary Benson in a few minutes, so let me ask this before you hop. You're both running for office. Secretary Benson, you've served as Secretary of State now since 2018 for 2 terms. What made you want to run for governor, and what lessons are you taking from your time as Secretary of State as you approach this campaign?
Well, I think the job of the next governor of Michigan is to be prepared to lower the cost of living on everything from healthcare to housing to our energy bills to childcare, build and grow our economy, and ensure that state government is showing up to do all of those things, drive down costs and create well-paying jobs, making it easier to start and grow a small business and everything else. And also be prepared to stand up to anyone, anytime, anywhere who would try to interfere with our democracy, our rights, our freedoms, our safeties, our privacy. I've done all those things as Secretary of State, and recognizing that's also the job of the governor in this moment. Though I was hoping to retire from politics.
No way.
To fight these battles anymore. The re-election of Trump in 2024 showed me that this battle is far from over, and I need to suit up and stay in the fight. So I'm doing that because I know, again, the path to the presidency runs right through our state in 2028. I know those who want to dismantle democracy are counting on us all being too exhausted to continue the fight. And while I am tired and I am weary, I am not giving up this fight. And I actually find a great honor in being able to continue the work, and will continue that work as governor in partnership with, frankly, some of the most inspiring public servants, probably the most inspiring public servants in the country to me right now, which are state leaders, and particularly Democratic governors, and in particular, women Democratic governors in Massachusetts, in Arizona, who are voices standing up to Donald Trump, but also standing up for the people of their states, for better healthcare, for a better economy, for democracy, and a government that works for all. So I'm proud to be running and fighting in this moment. And I know the assignment. I think it's all of our assignment, which is just for all of us to consistently and continually do everything we can and use every tool in our toolbox to engage citizens around this nation in defining who we are moving forward. And I say that knowing that the the eyes of all those who came before us, who fought and who marched and who bled so that we could live in a democracy that lives up to the promise of its founders. Their eyes are on us now to say, what are you going to do to continue our work in this moment? And as a mom of a 9-year-old little boy who will be a part of a generation that will inherit everything we leave behind, I know their eyes are on us now too, to say, roll up your sleeves and fight, because we need you to fight for us. We need you to stand with us, and we need you to protect our future. And that's the work. That's our work together. It's why I'm running, and why I know that we can be successful if we all continue to work together to win this November and then take our country back in 28 and beyond.
Well, we're really glad you did not decide to retire from politics. And the work is so challenging, and it is also the most critical thing I think that we can be doing in this time. So thank you for your service. Thank you for being one of our democracy heroes. And I know you'll hop in a moment, but Amanda, let me turn to you and just ask the same question. What made you decide to run for Secretary of State in New Mexico? And what are you taking from your time at the county level?
Well, part of it was, I think, our current Secretary of State, Maggie Toulouse-Oliver, who is a great friend and has been a mentor to me, is termed out. And so the position is an open seat. I have starting my 8th year as county clerk, which is, basically 2 terms. And I was appointed, so I had a couple of extra. But also, I really believe, as evidenced by me running, that I am the most experienced and qualified candidate to be Secretary of State by any measure. And that is because I have run, 12 elections. I'm starting my 8th year in the second most populous county in our borderland, with the most contentious elections in the state. And I think that's a given in itself because of the narrative regarding this congressional 2 race that I mentioned previously. And I was going to be a professor. I earned my PhD in 2016 and decided that of all things that I would do would be to run for office after being appointed. And I never thought that was the path for me. But everything that I've worked on academically or professionally has always been uplifted by the idea of representation and who's at the table and who's not at the table, right? So that is really, really important to me. And I will say, I have fought battles since 2018. I have had a lot of the things that election officials have dealt with, whether it's a death threat, the SBI being involved, being doxxed, a lot of those things I could go on and on about, as many of you know. So this is not about necessarily, the next Secretary of State will need to do this. I've been doing it. I've been doing it for 8 years. I hesitate to say that I'm battle tested, but I have stood up to and dealt with a lot of litigation where I've always made decisions on side of voters, and frankly, very relieved at our state that we almost always side with access and voters. And so that has been affirmed and reaffirmed again and again. They're not afraid of litigation in southern New Mexico, and I will make decisions that are hard, often always on side of the voters. I'm very proud of the Voting Rights Act that we passed several years ago. Embedded in that, even I think more importantly, is the Native American Voting Rights Act. And so that really does support our Indigenous communities having access and say, and they're participating in larger numbers every year. I want to be a part of that. And there are a lot of implementation things that need to happen. And I believe I am the best person for that. But the main reason is when I talked about, we're in a street fight for our democracy. I am that street fighter because I've had to be, not because I thought that was going to happen. I thought it was going to be this great, fun, world of democracy and voting. And it turned into something bigger and much more important. And I say this often, this isn't about me. This race that I'm in would be much easier if it was about me. It is so much bigger than me. That's why it is so important and absolutely something that I want to wrap my arms around and frankly win because I'm ready. And, some of the things that I think differentiate me is that I have supported a Senate Bill 264, which specifically prevents ICE agents from being in our polling locations. And in a border community where citizenship is often questioned, it is more important than ever to make a stand for vulnerable communities and those who try to prevent eligible citizens to vote. So I have,
and we know that ICE deployments at near polling places is definitely something we need to be prepared for in November. Let me ask you one final question, and then we're going to turn it to audience Q&A. I know there's a lot of people on this Zoom probably wondering what can everyday Americans do in this time. Obviously, we love to see people running for office, but there's so many ways to be involved in engaging with and protecting our democratic process. What are some ideas that you have for folks on this Zoom about kind of what to do about this moment in our country in trying to stand up for free and fair elections?
It is more important than ever to have accurate information that's grounded in being helpful and supportive in all of our county clerk's offices and all election officials. But what I also say is those folks in the communities, we need them. We need them to vet their information, dispel misinformation, and malinformation is specifically meant to mislead and dispel that at every opportunity. We need to talk about the importance of participation on another level. We need to acknowledge the concerns and fears of folks, specifically those who have historically not been invited to this table of democracy, as I like to say, and acknowledge it, but also encourage them and talk about this being such an absolutely important election that it could literally change my child's future, your children's futures, and that's what we are fighting for. It's not just about us and in our lives. I mean, we're on a Zoom. We're in a place of privilege in a lot of ways, and so acknowledging that continually and figuring out how can I connect with those who are not here? What do I need to do? And then following through on it. So grassroots organizing will often be the thing that we will default to, and connecting with communities and making them helping them and supporting whatever they need and letting them guide us. One of the things I say often, and it's of course a takeoff of, a bigger quote, but it's people closest to the pain and the problem are the ones with the solution. And so the participation aspect is huge. It's not just about registering people to vote. It's actually getting them to the polls and to getting them to follow through on that registration and actually make a difference. So, those are some of the ways. I know every day I see folks writing postcards. They're in front of supermarkets registering people to vote. We call them promotoras here in the South and Southern New Mexico. And it's basically community members that don't have a formal education, but are experts on their community, going to, whether it's the senior centers, whether it's going to schools, whether it's any of those things. All of those things. It's not one thing. It is all of the things that are going to make the difference. And we have to maximize them everywhere we can and encourage it at all times.
And you can volunteer to be a poll worker. There's so many ways you can engage. I'll add one more thing, which is that Secretary Benson talked about Calais and the impact of that redistricting decision. One of the things that we are going to need to ensure is really strong voter turnout in November. In part as a result of that decision, also just because, with tight margins, our jobs become even more difficult. Your job, the secretary's job, my job. So we really need to see people turn out. I was with a group of high school students not that long ago, and asked how many of them planned to vote when they turned 18, and maybe a tenth of the room raised their hands. And I think we also need to really be engaging our children, our young people in this process. So I always say, bring your kid with you when you go vote, or have them be there with you when you fill out the ballot if you're voting by mail, but making sure that we also really are engaging and educating that next generation.
Agreed, for sure.
Kitty, do you want to help us with Q&A? What?
Yes. And I just want to say, I threatened my children who are of voting age. I would never make them another meal, do another load of laundry if they didn't vote. So there's also threats. That's a good way to go too.
You are not the first mom I've heard say that, and I like that a lot.
Oh yeah, no. When they're old enough to tie their shoes and vote, then they should just do it.
Agreed.
And drive a car, for goodness sakes. Joanna, this question is for you. It came up in the chat. There is, I think, for those of us who are feeling frustrated by like the parties and what they're doing and how they're behaving and how they're reacting, it just feels like neither party is meeting the moment. A lot of frustration on this call with the Democratic Party. And you had mentioned that there is this broader coalition that, and Jocelyn spoke to this too, that that election officials came together in 2020. Amanda, you mentioned it too, to really fight back against the attempt to overturn a free and fair election. So could you sort of give us an overview of what that coalition looks like? What is the work that's being done? So I think we all will feel a little bit better knowing that this is not about the parties. This is about real experts doing the work to make sure that, we're all going to be okay if we all do our part.
Absolutely. It is a strong coalition, stronger than I've ever seen it. It's a bipartisan coalition, and it is a coalition of organizations and people who've been doing this work since 2020 and even before then. So we've seen a lot over these years. We've been through a lot, and working very hard to prepare the states for what's ahead in November. My organization is focused on governors and state AGs and secretaries of state and the role that they play. We do some work at the county and local level as well. And in that effort, partner with hundreds of organizations across the country that do everything from providing technical assistance to local election officials to, making sure that veterans' voices are uplifted in this process, to making sure that, we have people working in state legislatures to impact the way that voting rights are being shaped there. And so I would just say that it is the A team, absolutely. And we are going to leave it all on the field this year. And I think one of the things that is also important for people to know is that in 2020, some of the people who stood up and spoke truth about our elections and did the most critical work of refusing to bend to the president's will were actually Republicans at the county and local level. We continue to watch as people are standing up on both sides of the aisle. One example is those voter roll demands that the secretary mentioned, where, the Department of Justice is trying to obtain unprecedented, really sensitive voter data across the country. And that is something that is being challenged, not just by blue states, but also by red states and purple states alike. So definitely getting to work with the incredible patriotic, officials across the country who do this work day to day, like Amanda, is a real highlight for me and something that just gives me hope, which can sometimes feel hard to come by in this moment. But spend a day with one of our local election officials and you will definitely have it restored.
Amanda, anything to add to that?
No, I think that was a great capture of it. I think, I continue to talk about this idea of hope and balancing this very scary scenario that I think can grab attention, but is also discouraging. And I think balancing it with realistic, this is what's going on and this is what we need to do to tackle it, take it on. And on the other end, be able to, like I said, have this turnout that I believe would support the ideals of our country. It's for me, it's not that complicated. I do think about the Supreme Court decision. And I often talk about my mom in my campaign, partly because she grew up in a side of the state that was pretty segregated in the early 50s. She was one of a generation of New Mexicans that had my mom was a Spanish speaker and had the Spanish spanked out of her in school, right? Corporally punished for speaking Spanish, placed in special classes because of it. And so I think about the Supreme Court decision and how this idea that racial disparities don't exist in our country, that's the implication. And to wrap your brain around that is really the assumption is shocking. And I will tell you, I was fortunate. I'm on the local leadership council of the Election and Assistance Commission. And I sit at tables with election officials all across the country. And regardless of their party, they're on board. They want to do everything they can to make sure access to the ballot box is not affected by these things. It doesn't matter their affiliation. We are with each other. It's about the work and it's about our communities and making their voices heard. It's not about partisanship. It's about the actual work. So I think the average person will be surprised how much basically there's a great group of bipartisan officials that are ready to defend elections because they know it's the right thing to do, and they've worked in elections for so long that it'd be hard for them to deny the idea that we don't run great elections. Do we have issues? Are they perfect? Of course, it's a human process. They're not perfect, but they are really, really good. And so for them to then have to defend it to their to a specific party is probably really challenging, but they're stepping up and they're doing it. They're in a tough position. So I think, all of the things that we talk about in terms of grassroots organizing, the will of the people, I think we all feel that, especially here on this call. This is why we're present. It's really getting out and making that bigger and larger and constant until the midterms.
Yeah, one of our attendees just mentioned, Eleanor just mentioned that voter turnout was what made the difference in defeating tyranny in Hungary last month. It feels like years ago when that happened, but it's a great reminder, Eleanor. So thank you for that. A couple more questions for you. Eleanor asks, can we trust the U.S. Postal Service to deliver ballots to voters and completed ballots to the BOEs? Is there a way to check if they have been properly delivered? Maybe you both want to chime in on that. So Joanna, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I can take the high level, and then Amanda, you are the expert on ballots and delivery and the like. I will just say we had a fight in 2020 around the Postal Service. It was one of the tools that Trump tried to leverage in his effort to interfere with the election. And we helped a group of states fight that successfully. We are prepared to do that again. It is certainly a tactic we've watched him use, trying to undermine the work of the Postal Service, take over the work of the Postal Service, interfere, using the Postal Service with mail-in voting, obviously part of a much larger strategy of trying to mess with mail-in voting across the board. And whether it is the Postal Service or whether it is his latest executive order, which tries to take control over mail-in voting and who can vote by mail, or whatever angle he comes at this from. The good news is that the states have been there litigating very successfully. Again, did so in 2020, did so with respect to this executive order. We've had lots of success in court. I could talk about the Supreme Court separately, but this is a place where the states are very prepared to take action, and quick action.
Great. Amanda, any thoughts about what people should be watching for with their mail-in ballots?
So the local postal officials have been so supportive and so helpful and gone above and beyond for the last 8 years that I've worked with them. They are federal employees that want to get their job done as well. And so the idea, I've talked to many of them, even in areas of leadership, and it's deeply distressing to them, this idea that something could be affected in the delivery of what they believe is their, call to action, or their life's work in a lot of ways, the idea that it could be affected. So I'm hopeful about it. One of the great things about a lot of these executive orders is that they're unconstitutional continually, right? And so, the litigation battle begins, and sometimes that's where it will stay for maybe years. I think that is something that everybody is prepared for, should it come to that. I think there are so many supportive democracy, attorneys across the country that are chomping at the bit to defend. And I feel pretty good about the Postal Service today. Messages and discussions we've had, and the processing that they're planning on doing and it not being affected, I feel pretty good about it today. So, we're going to bear down, and I think kind of keep our eyes and ears open and be prepared to battle it out if we have to.
Yeah, people should absolutely feel comfortable, secure voting by mail. And also, people really trust mail voting, even despite all of the lies that the president has spewed over these years. We poll this consistently, and we find really broad support for mail voting across the country and across both parties. So that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
And let's remind people he just voted by mail
No,
He
in
did.
their
That's
I
right.
current
would say that.
election. So
Yeah.
just saying. And Joanna, you mentioned it too. She's just worried about the possibility of SCOTUS involvement in election decisions. We saw that the Supreme Court essentially upheld the 2020 election time and time again. But how are you feeling, Joanna, about the prospect of what the court could do this time?
Sure. Well, I'm not going to lie. It has definitely been a discouraging uh, year and a half with the Supreme Court. It's been a discouraging time with the Supreme Court. And also, they have been willing to set some limits. And I think that's really important to remember in order to not lose hope. There have been decisions on birthright citizenship and tariffs, and there have been, places where the Supreme Court has checked Trump's use of his emergency authority. And also, so few cases end up before the Supreme Court. I think that's another important thing to remember. The state attorneys general have filed more than 100 cases against the administration. They are winning in a majority of those. Many of them are decided in the lower courts and the appeals courts. And I think that if a case goes up to the Supreme Court that is really on a nuclear issue, the invocation of emergency powers to try to interfere with the election, or, I don't think this will happen, but try to cancel the election, or something that is really a major departure from the way that we have always run elections in this country, I really do believe that the Supreme Court will intervene and do the right thing. It is also important to them to maintain their own standing and credibility, though they have certainly given the president pretty wide berth when it comes to the use of his executive powers. One of the reasons why we do the work every day to help states litigate these issues as they arise, whether it's the filing of an elections executive order, which, as Amanda said, was completely unconstitutional, or the deployment of, National Guard troops in a state, even after they've already left the state, we will continue to litigate because we want to set precedent. We want to make sure that the courts have weighed in on what the boundaries are around the president's power. And again, we've had a lot of success winning in some really critical cases, and I think setting some really important precedent for what's ahead. There will be some guardrails around his authority. It doesn't mean he won't try to bust through those guardrails, but there will again be accountability from the states and also from our counties and our municipalities.
Amanda, do you want to add anything to that?
I think Joanna covered it. Great job. I mean, I agree with everything she said. You could see me nodding, going, yes, yes, yes. And so I think again, in terms of it actually ending up in front of the Supreme Court, that would be few and far between and very rare. And so I'm hoping that that means that the lower courts have resolved in favor of voters and access.
Yeah, a couple of questions about what we've seen happen since the Calais decision was handed down in southern states and redistricting in particular, and the idea that that this could spread around the country, and particularly in any district where there is a person of color who represents that district, that this could be the wave of the future. So I just would love to. This is going to be a longer conversation. We have next week. I hope everyone will come, but Lauren Growergo is coming to speak to us about the Calais decision, and it will be a very important conversation. But I would love to hear from both of you sort of what you think is happening in the short term and the long term, and what we as Americans who care about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment and equal access should be thinking about and paying attention to. So, Joanna, do you want to start?
Sure. So, as Secretary Benson said, Calais pretty much wiped out the power of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which prevents racial discrimination in redistricting. Calais could change a number of districts just between now and the midterm. So if we first just look at this period that's immediately in front of us, clustered in the South, there are a number of districts that could be at risk, which could, of course, change the map. And I think there is no one better than Lauren Growargo to get into the details of what organizations, groups, the coalition is doing right now to try to mitigate some of that damage and how that is likely to play out across those states. As I said, no matter what, this decision makes voter turnout even more important in November, and having really high numbers. Gerrymandering really only works if people vote the way you expect them to. And one of the things that we saw in Hungary, to the comment in the chat, is that country was heavily gerrymandered, but then people changed their minds about who they wanted to support. So when decisions are made based on 2024 turnout and then people decide to make a different decision, that doesn't really work in the favor of the party that's trying to control things. And then in terms of what is going to be happening, and in this period of time, I think we may also see some challenges to maps across the country. We at States United will be helping states defend against those challenges and trying to maintain as much predictability and as little chaos for voters in this period before the midterms. After November, we certainly could see big changes in the landscape. And I think it sort of remains to be seen. I think there's as many as 60 seats in the House that could be up for grabs, or that could be decided by the effects of this decision. And we're going to need to see how it plays out. And I certainly hope that I can tune in to watch Lauren describe it, because she's definitely an expert on this.
Amanda, what do you think, what are you looking at right now and in the future as you think about becoming the Secretary of State of New Mexico? And I'm knocking on wood right now.
Well, I think like most of us who are tuned in, which is hopefully most of us, I really am looking at the midterms and see what kind of, what tone our country has decided that we're going to set next. And having said that, I talk a lot about the idea that standing up continually and not letting this misinformation and malinformation slide in any audience is really important. Because, I don't necessarily, all of us are here, we all vote, right? It's those that are in the gray area that maybe want to participate, have never voted, but thought, this might be the time I feel compelled. Young people who have unprecedented access to information and are passionate about one thing or another, they're registering as independents or decline to state, as we call it in our state, at record numbers. I think those folks are going to help us, get back to where we at least in line, but also this idea that the democracy belongs to everyone. And, the Supreme Court decision really was beyond being discouraging. I think it really strikes at the core of what our entire country has been built on. And the hypocrisy in that is not lost, I think, on me or a lot of people. And as far as Secretary of State, we're in a minority majority state. And frankly, we have really pro-voter law. We are on front and center of basically access and security and doing everything we can for voters. And I think part of my work will be to maintain that and expand on it at every given opportunity, as well as connect with every part of our state to give them resources and support them in any way they need. But also this idea that turnout is so key, and what can we do to promote that? I hired somebody for my team that is a Gen Zer, and he has basically gone and done such an amazing job in engaging young voters, whether it's his YouTube or the podcast we have, or these little, 30-second clips we have. Those are all the ways that we need to engage for participation of people who don't feel like, it doesn't really matter. They feel that malaise, I guess you could say. And there's people that have voted for many years that are also feeling that malaise, and to kind of bring them in. So, that's some of the things that the Secretary of State, I think, will do. But I think when we talk about initially is the fight to defend from federal overreach is our biggest challenge. And we need to reassure and support our communities that are scared about that, and validate it again, but also turn around and defend it at every given turn. And people like Joanna and, BigTent, there's more strength in numbers. It's like the organizing 101. And I believe that the will of us, majority of us, will prevail. I have to believe that, frankly. They say you get the government you deserve. Well, we deserve better.
Yes, we do.
Yes, yeah.
Yes. Well, I just want to say thank you to both of you so much for joining Big Ten tonight. It was an incredible conversation, just what we needed. Amanda, wishing you the best of luck in your campaign, and we will be watching, and we hope to have you back.
Anytime.
On the other side. But we're really excited that you could join us tonight. And Joanna, as always, an incredible work at States United. I do hope that you will be looking at the website in ways that you can support States United. It's really, really critical work this year and into the future. So everyone, I hope you have a great night. Stay safe, stay engaged. Let's just stay laser focused through November, everybody. Thanks for coming to Big Tent. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Take care.